All right, and we are live. Let's see. Welcome to Sister Reach Monthly Social Justice Preacher Series. I'm Elise Salisbury, Deputy Director at Sister Reach. Sister Reach is a grassroots 501c3 nonprofit organization founded by Cherise Scott in 2011 in Memphis, Tennessee. Sister Reach supports the reproductive autonomy of women and teens of color, poor and rural women, LGBTQIA+ people, and their families through the framework of reproductive justice. Sister Reach's mission is to empower our base to lead healthy lives, raise healthy families, and live in healthy and sustainable communities. This is achieved through working by a four-pronged strategy: education, policy and advocacy, cultural shifts, and harm reduction on local, national, and international platforms. Again, thanks for joining us for today's Social Justice Preacher Series. Our guest is one of Memphis's best, Minister Tameka Greer. To give you a little bit about Minister Greer, Minister Tameka Greer is a daughter, sister, wife, an official, unofficial ambassador, and avid lover of Memphis, Tennessee. She is an associate minister at Abyssinian Baptist Church. As a founder and executive director of Memphis Artists for Change, she has held numerous leadership positions both locally and regionally. Minister Greer's heart for the youth led her to the role of project director of youth services at American Job Centers for Shelby County, Tipton, and Fayette in Tennessee. She has developed programming in the most neglected communities in Memphis and nearby rural areas to address the deficits in our communities. So I introduce to some and present to others one of Memphis's best, Minister Tameka Greer.
Thank you so much for having me. I greatly appreciate not just the invitation, but the work of the organization of Sister Reach. I know your founder so well. Cherise is an alum of Overton High School. I want to plug the creative and performing arts capital of the world. I met Cherise back in high school and got to work with her a lot, doing a lot of this social justice work. And I am honored that her organization that stands in the same stance as she does, the same positioning and posture of her wanting justice for all and fighting for justice for all would even extend an invitation to me. I had the opportunity to watch a couple of the videos of other speakers and I decided to turn them off because I'm like, maybe they made a mistake in inviting me. So at least thank you. When you say one of Memphis's best, I'll just say thank you. But I am an avid lover of this city. I'm a fighter for all things just and for all people. And I try to show up that way because at some point somebody fought for me and will fight for me again. So again, thank you for the opportunity to speak to your listening audience. I pray that this message blesses someone as it has continued to bless me in preparing for this moment. And I won't belittle the moment. Again, I'll just say thank you. But I'll be actually speaking from Micah 6:6-8. I like Micah because for me, it is one of the prophet's most simplistic ways of inviting us to a place that shows how we should show up when we walk in concert with God, right? So Micah 6, verses 6-8 reads, "With what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before God on high? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000s of rivers of soil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has told you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God." Those words have guided many of my choices in relationships over the years. So growing up, I had a quick comeback for everything, even conversations that didn't want or require my input. I became real skilled with words, and I was good at using them. And even at a very young age, I recognized how adults were kind of in awe of my quick wit or my sense of understanding for my age, right? And so this motivated me to talk good. And as my mama would say, to talk too much. And as my elders often told me, to talk out of turn. Because I didn't like the way I felt when I was chastised or chided for talking too much or talking out of turn. I tried to figure out how to tame my tongue. I wanted a test, a way to gauge whether or not I should say certain things. So in the process of trying to tame my tongue, I ran across a friend who was, or who had overcome the same obstacle. And she told me that she used 3 criteria that she decided let her know if it was a time and a place for her to speak. One was it necessary? The second was it kind? The third, was it true? I was like, okay, something can be necessary and kind, not necessarily true. Something can be necessary and true, but not necessarily kind. I was like, well, if it's necessary and true, and if it's not kind, should you say it? And so what she said to me is every exception should be judged with the heart of God. I'm like, I act like I knew what that meant at the time, right? But as I grew and as life grew, as I began to study more of God's word and try to, walk as a great representative of God, I came across Micah 6 and 8, this scripture. And if you look at verse 8 basically tells us how we ought to show up in the world as evidence. So our evidence that we are in relationship, in righteous relationship with God, to me, was wrapped up in verse 8, right? And it was like, make justice, love kindness, walk humbly with God. Those things parallel a lot what I thought my friend was telling me about the things that told her whether or not she should speak. Was it necessary? Make justice. Justice is a necessity of righteousness. It is necessary. Love kindness. Is it kind? Kindness is rooted in compassion, right? Walk humbly with God. This is a walk that's grounded in integrity. And what did she say that last marker was? Truth. I felt these principles could not only guide my choices and what to say, but also help me to gauge my relationships. Stay with me. Growing up in Memphis, we moved more than a few times. I often frame this particular consequence of poverty in a positive light by saying poverty afforded me the opportunity to move around a lot. But moving around a lot often restricted me from the opportunity of having long-standing friendships, right? So we went where our housing options took us. We stayed in South Memphis, we stayed in Westwood, we stayed in Whitehaven, a couple of places in Whitehaven. Finally, we landed in Cherokee. And that was the time that I remember us being most settled. My mom purchased her first home. And the house was in, like I said, the Cherokee area, which is not quite Orange Mound, not quite University of Memphis, not quite Sherwood Forest, all right? So during this time of transition in my life, I met Tam. Tam is now my oldest and dearest friend. We've been friends about 30 years. I met her before we moved to Cherokee. Actually, we were living in Whitehaven and attending a well-known church in the area. And we both sang in the choir. We became friends. I assumed that this friendship would be much like others once I learned we had to move. But the move actually afforded me an opportunity to go to the same school as Tam, right? So now Tam and I, totally different creatures, different as day and night. So I was more of am a tomboy. Tam is what you call a girly girl. I was a hood. Tam was much more of a debutante. She was into pageantry and performance, and I like to write and read. Tam would have been thought of what people call bougie. And not the bougie we've come comfortable with, not the one like the Facebook group and bougie Black women who shop at Aldi, where we actually embrace the word in some sense, the other bougie. And I would have been considered the down-to-earth one, right? So Tam didn't make the bougie assumption hard to come by. She was, by her own admittal, often standoffish. She has, since we have grown and both have matured, even admitted to being, she used to be very judgmental of people without knowing it, all right? Tam's tongue could cut deep and fast and without regard for other folks. Now, this may be something we had more in common than not, except again, I was in that process of trying to tame my tongue, right? So this is the place in the story where I'm sure y'all expect me to tell y'all how me and Tam were so different, but we had some amazing moment where she either saw the softer side of me or I saw the softer side of her, and that just etched our friendship in stone. Well, honestly, I can't tell y'all how me and Tam. We sang in the choir together, the youth and young adult choir. We were both altos, and she would sing the right note in my ear because I was singing the wrong note. One note in between, right? Now, I don't know if she did that for me, if she did it for her, but it helped both her, me, and the choir in the long run. But for all intents and purposes, there was no way that Tam and I would be friends. We might have a very superficial, surface relationship based off of what people could see, social media type friends, but there were no indicators that we would have such a long-lasting, righteous relationship. What I'm calling a righteous relationship, and what I'm calling a righteous relationship is what has come for me to be the basis of how I judge the worthiness of relationships and of my role in a relationship, any relationship. It's what I believe God would have, how God would have us to show up in the world. I believe if there's any litmus test for what a relationship ought to be, it ought to be based on how God would have us to show up in the world. And that takes us back to Micah 6:8. Do justice, love kindness, walk humbly with your God. Do justice, do or make justice. Justice is necessary for equity in relationships, period. In the world, personal relationships, societal relationships, justice is a necessary element for there to be equity in relationships, for righteousness to exist in relationships. Love, kindness, this is the love of mercy manifest. Walk humbly with your God. This walk is grounded in integrity and in truth. It is a very deliberate, what's a walk? Walk is a deliberate pace, right? So it's a very deliberate pace, but it's a pace that's not preoccupied with one's own self, with one's own need first. One of my favorite parables in the Bible is the parable of the Good Samaritan. The parable of the Good Samaritan to me is a perfect example of what righteous relationship looks like. So in Luke 10, a lawyer talks with Jesus about how he might inherit eternal life, right? He knows he has to follow the Jewish law, the one that says, love your neighbor as yourself. And so he asks Jesus, who is my neighbor? He wants a clarifying answer. He's looking for a loophole in this commandment. So Jesus responds with the parable of the Good Samaritan, where a man that the text identifies as a traveler is attacked, robbed, and left for dead on the side of the road. Now, the priest and the Levite were both considered to be honorable by society standards. They both passed the man by. Then a Samaritan, a person belonging to a culture that Jewish people of the time would have despised. See, this Samaritan sees the traveler. The Samaritan not only sees the traveler, he stops to aid him. He bandages his wounds. He takes him to a hotel, to an inn. He cares for him. He leaves money to make sure that the innkeeper continues to care. He promises to come back and repay anything that the innkeeper has to spend in order to care for this traveler, this stranger. Jesus then asks, of these three, of the priest, the Levite, of the Samaritan, who acted as a neighbor to the man that was robbed? The lawyer answers, the one who showed him mercy. But wait, if the traveler had not found himself in dire need. He probably wouldn't have encountered the robbed man. He wouldn't have had an opportunity to know whether or not this man was neighbor. So how are we able to identify our neighbor when we only have superficial knowledge of them? Experience is how. You judge, what's that? Judge a tree by the fruit it bears. The Samaritan might have believed differently from the traveler. He might have worshiped differently from the traveler. He more than likely lived a different life from the traveler. In the most superficial definition of neighbor, if the most superficial definition of neighbor is someone who lives in our community, the Samaritan and the traveler probably wouldn't meet the standards of the definition. We know the man was more than likely outside his community because he was traveling. More than likely, they ain't come from the same place because he was traveling. But what identifies the Samaritan as neighbor was his actions. His actions show up like that of a person who walks humbly with God. I implore you to judge not just your relationships on this standard of righteousness, your interpersonal relationships, but all your relationships. See, relationships involve one or more parties, right? So this standard can be applied to all relationships. Your relationship with people, your relationship with society, and most importantly, your relationship with God. Like the Samaritan and the traveler, based on the superficial, my friend Tam and I were unlikely to have a righteous relationship. But when I judge on action and interaction, I find a deeper truth. When my abusive stepfather made our house a den of chaos, it was bougie Tam offering me a place of refuge. When my big mama died, it was bougie Tam that was there offering me comfort. When heartbreak landed at my door, bougie Tam was the one checking on me. And almost 30 years later, when I'm the friend who forgets to call, who hasn't texted, it's bougie Tam who's sending a message that starts with "Hey boo" and ends with love. Her love of kindness, her desire to make justice, provide equity, her walk with God wasn't evidence in all the surface things. It was evidence in our interactions. So again, not just your friendships, you can also judge your relationship to society using this litmus test. Is society just and kind? Is there evidence that society has a concern for all people or just a few? Justice is rooted in equity. Equity provides for each person or thing what they need based on their individual situation. Is your business, the society, a neighborhood, community, or government that rules in the society you're in, is it just? Does it provide for those in need as it does for those who have an abundance of resources? Do these systems create, maintain, or promote inequity? If the answer doesn't affirm these as righteous relationships, I would suggest that you assess them. And after you assess them, make a decision. I would suggest that you change. If we examine the last part of the litmus test, walk humbly with God, we should find our motivation to work to change any systems that don't meet the other requirements of the litmus test. Humility is a modest view of one's own importance in the grand scheme of things. Loving your neighbor as yourself is grounded in humility. Out of love for yourself and your neighbor, this is when you should work to change systems, institutions, or a society that are not just and kind. Is there equity in education, healthcare, food security in your community or society? If the answer is no, the opportunity for you to be the neighbor is upon you right now. So if you love kindness, if you do justice, if you walk humbly with God, You should rage against any system of oppression that neglects the least of these, that leaves others out, that is unjust to mothers, to widows, that is unkind to LGBTQ, that is unfair to people because of the color of their skin. You should not just reject them, but rage against them, because it is the right thing to do. That is doing justice. That is loving kindness. That is what it looks like to walk humbly with God. It's our duty to ensure that the roles of all of these entities benefit all people, especially those who could use a good neighbor. If you want to be in righteous relationships with others, society, and most importantly, God, we should always be a part of the work of justice. We should be kind, and this will all be evidenced by our walk. It's not difficult. I love Micah 6:8 so much, because it wraps it up so simply. Do justice, love kindness, walk humbly with God. That is for the believers in the word. But what I find to be amazing is I find so many people who do not attest or attain to be believers of this Bible, of this word, who meet these standards, who, much like the Good Samaritan, may look different from me, may worship different from me, may show up different from me. But there's a commonality when I look and see that they do or make justice, that they love kindness or mercy, and that their walk, for me, is evidence that they walk with God by the pace of their walk and the intent of it. I pray that the systems in your life are overturned by your desire to walk like you walk with God. The word of God for the people of God.
Reverend. Thank you so much. So much substance. Thank you.
You are so very welcome. Thank y'all.
It's messages like this that, in the crux of being busy and going, that these messages, like what you just ministered, makes us stop, right? And go, am I really honoring my neighbor, right? Am I really, when it's done for work, right, is one thing. But having to stop and be reminded that, no, this is at work and at home and all the places, right? So much substance. And I just the things that you lifted. First of all, you lifted words that we don't really hear a lot, right? We don't really hear now as ministers, right? We'll hear it. And sometimes we hear it and we don't hear it, but we don't hear it as often, right? So words like integrity, words like humility, when dealing with, when dealing with our neighbors, right? Whether it's the person next door or whether it's the person who's been robbed on the side of the road, right? So can you help those who may struggle, right, with the person, or with even seeing the person on the side of the road as their neighbor, right? Because when I say we, I mean the general, humanity, people, because of the times that we live, it sometimes gives us pause to stop and help the stranger, not wanting to put ourselves in trouble. But say more about that, if you will, about seeing that person as a neighbor.
I think what many of us shy away from is the truth that love is a risk. You know what I'm saying? So to stand in that thing is like, there is no shield from showing up in the world in such a way that you don't expose yourself to be vulnerable and even expose yourself for hurt. You know what I mean? So when you talk about the dangers of loving certain neighbors, I made a Facebook post a couple of years ago. There was a lot of crime at some point going on in the city. And we were talking, people were kind of talking about how to fix it. And I was like, well, if we ain't talking about going into these neighborhoods talking to these people, these quote unquote criminals, these gangbangers that got all us scared, we will never, ever get to the crux of the problem. If the problem is crime, if the problem is gun violence, well, if I'm talking to people who don't own guns, I'm not trying to get to the heart of the problem. So we have to be willing to risk being in some sense of danger, even being hurt, even being disappointed. That love does not cower because of risk. So what we have to be willing to do is to face the fear of being hurt, being turned away, not being received. Just because you walk up to Johnny on the corner and say, I love you, son, don't mean he gonna let you reach your arms around him and hug him. But your position should be the one that is always extending love. So kind of like I said in the message, you have to judge yourself in that narrative as well. In the parable of the Good Samaritan, the man on the side of the road, the Good Samaritan needed a neighbor. Was the man on the side of the road a neighbor? He never got to know until he got healed, because he wasn't in a position, in a place to show up his neighbor. You see what I'm saying? Yes. His actions were gonna determine that. So I think that people, if I can give a suggestion, like, be willing to risk it. And that's not to say that hurt and disappointment won't come with that risk, but the promise is in what happens when we stand on God's word.
My Lord. Yes, all of what you said. And I think in a moment like COVID, right, it makes it a little bit riskier, in terms of face-to-face interaction, and things like that. So, we're saying be willing to risk and be safe while you're risking.
Please be safe.
Because you're absolutely right. Like, we have to take the risk, right, to approach people that may look unapproachable, or because some of us judge, right, a situation. I always say I'm from North Memphis, so I'm I'm used to, right. Look, and my mama is an evangelist, and so whether it was then or now, she'll walk up to anybody. So that's that's a trait that I took from my mom, being able to talk to people, and love them and treat them as neighbor. The other thing is, because we also never know, right, whether we end up in a position to need a neighbor or not, right? Yeah. We're our day is coming, and we don't look like what that need will be for us, right? It could just be someone lending a kind word or a smile. Yeah. But it's being a neighbor, because you got to be a friend to have a friend, as they say. I also appreciated the point you made about Tam. Though there was an assumption of bougie, right? It was the bougie one that helped in a time of need. It was the one that, that most people would say, well, that's not my friend. Or, maybe I can't approach them or get to know them because of how they look. But again, I like what you lifted up. And in the righteous relationship, it doesn't have the boundaries of what a person look right. It's getting to know the person beyond what you see. It's taking the risk. Because here's what I found out about me in my life. People that I think are unapproachable, they normally turn out to be the folks who will be the first to show up for the battle.
You hear me? And the last to leave after the cleanup.
Exactly. They're the first to show up, last to leave, and gonna feed everybody before you go.
Everybody.
So yeah, just kind of fighting through the assumptions that sometimes we have of how people when they're in in our presence or what have you. The other thing I appreciated hearing you say was the three principles to guide our relationships. Or even speaking, communication, right? Because it's the verbal and nonverbal that we communicate that can open the door to get to know the bougie.
Come on now.
So is it necessary, right? Right, like reeling us back in today is what you did. Is it necessary, right? And if it's necessary to say it, is it kind, right? And it could be necessary and kind, but if you don't know it to be true, Like you offered so much substance. It was that, all right, we know y'all advocates. We know you're out there. We know, different things going on at home, whether it's in relationships with your sister, relationships with your boss. Like come back.
Come back in.
Thank you for lifting those things up, again, and reminding us and reeling us back in. Is it necessary? Is it kind?
Is it true?
Yeah, absolutely. Righteous relationships, y'all. This is Minister Tameka Greer. You need you need a poet. This is your person. Because Greer will give you the business. What was the one you did? I'm not going to tell the one you did. I'm not going to say the whole thing, but if you want to know what it was, I remember us being at, what was the place called that you guys had where everybody come together?
The Word or Artistic Lounge?
Artistic Lounge. You did one, and it was about the hit, getting the hit. I'm gonna remind you of it later. We're gonna dig that one back up because it's still in my head. If you need a poet that's gonna give you the business, and as you see a minister that's gonna, give you what righteousness is, Minister Greer.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this opportunity again, for this platform. Hey, you just blessed me giving it back to me. So hey, I appreciate the opportunity. I pray you bless.
It was thick. It was rich. The word you gave. We absolutely appreciate you. Thank you for the reminder of humility, and we know that folks who were in attendance with us, have been blessed, by what you shared. Thank you so much again. Thank you for your support of Sister Reach. We absolutely appreciate you and the work that you do in the community. So thank you all for being here with us today. Thank you for those who are maybe working or busy and will join us to watch the replay later. Thank you so much, everybody. This is Reverend Lee Salisbury, Deputy Director at Sister Reach, with Minister Tameka Greer, minister at Abyssinian, and poet. Don't forget that part. Over and out. Have a great week, y'all.
Y'all be good.